I'm Hiten Shah, and I've started different online businesses since 2003. So that's 16 years as of this recording. And they've been mostly in software. And I had one consulting company early on. That was the first company I started. More recently, I started a company called FYI. It's at usefyi.com, and it helps you find your documents in 3 clicks or less. And it's a very like single player. You sign up whether your personal account or your company account, and then you can find your documents really quickly. And that's what our promise is to you. And currently, what we've been calling it is sort of like a document organization service that automatically does it for you. And what's coming next is we're building a product for teams. And that product for teams, our whole philosophy on it is build a product teams love. Because we know we built a product that individual people who use it love it. So now we're going to build a product that teams love. That's kind of the next stage of the product. And I've learned all of this through some of the last 16 years of trying to build software and building it, but also through the companies I started in the past. So I started a company called Crazy Egg,
Yeah.
and that one's still around right now. I started another one called Kissmetrics that's been through a lot of different incarnations. We raised a bunch of money, and I left the company about 4 or 5 years ago. And so there's me. I'm for a lot of people would say I'm a SaaS founder. I've also invested or advised about 120 plus companies and counting. So yeah, that's me. You wanted an intro. That's the intro.
That's awesome. To give a bit of context for the audience, how many companies are you currently running?
I have a Crazy Egg, which is self-funded. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that I'm necessarily running it, but there's a team in place over there and they run it. And then we have FYI, which is the business I just talked about, which I spend most of my energy and time on.
Yeah, most entrepreneurs usually they either roll with just one company or they exit the other company in order to start a new one. What made you stick to Crazy Egg, or what was the thought process behind keeping another company while starting another company?
Yeah, we had a self-funded company. So Crazy Egg's been self-funded since the beginning. And so there wasn't like venture backing in it. And we had another idea to build a second sort of different differentiated analytics company, and that ended up being Kissmetrics. So it was more out of like we just did it. And we happened to have one that was self-funded and the other that was funded. And that's just how things ended up. So I wouldn't say there was any like specific like rhyme or reason. You're
Yeah.
talking about 10 years ago though,
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
that this kind of transition happened for us. So it's not something that I can say, oh, this just happened, and like, you know, it was very prescriptive and I knew what I was doing. I think things just happened.
Okay, so let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm running my own firm, and suddenly I have like that idea, some similar as you, but I don't think that's going to be a good product extension. Um, would you actually recommend people to think more about jumping in? What kind of challenge does that actually bring to then go ahead and then start a new company?
Um, you could start a new product. You don't need to start a new company. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. It's just a calculation of, does it make sense with the value proposition of the current business and the customer base and why they're signing up? Is this an expansion of the current product, or is this something that needs to be separate? And when it's separate, if I were to, give people some thoughts today, I would say that I probably wouldn't do it if it was not going to be an extension of the existing product. The main reason is you can, it's much easier to expand your existing product and get other people to use it than it is to go build a new product and get people to use that. It's already hard enough to get them to use a new feature. So I tend to suggest that people really double down on the existing product they have, because they probably already built a bunch of brand equity and things like that in the existing one. It'll be much easier if they focus on that. For example, the folks at 37 Signals, right? The folks who built Ruby on Rails, they have a philosophy where they used to build new products kind of pretty regularly, like maybe like once every couple of years, if not like in the beginning. I think they did it a lot faster. And now the company's not even called 37 Signals.
Yeah,
It's
base
called
camp now.
Basecamp,
Hmm.
and they have one product, right? And they're really consolidating everything around that one product because my hypothesis is it's their cash cow.
So let's step back and change gear a little bit. So you advise, more than 100 companies already. What do you think is the biggest struggle in terms of department in the company? Which one is the hardest to put in place? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it finance? HR? What do you see as a pattern here, specifically for SaaS businesses? I would say.
I think finance and calculating uh, finance and data around finance is probably a really big challenge for most companies. And getting the numbers right, understanding the sort of profit and loss is not as simple as you might think in most SaaS businesses that I've seen.
Can you give an example as to why this is so complicated?
You have recurring revenue,
Yeah.
and recurring revenue is a little bit challenging to calculate at times. And so, yeah, I found this repeatedly that like the way you account for the revenue, the day the money comes in the bank, if you have a trial, things like that lead to lots of different sort of configurations around how to calculate the money. You also have yearly renewals in a lot of cases. So you have all these things. Then you have invoices coming in. So all of that makes accounting a little more challenging, if not a lot more challenging. There are tools out there like Profitwell
Yep.
that are built on top of Stripe that help you get some of this better, but you still have the need of sort of finance and having to sort of manage the data and then have usually engineers or somebody like that help you sort through it and figure out kind of what to do when you're running into some issues or when you're running into like problems with like accounting and cash in versus cash out and then accrual basis and all those things. So what I've found is that it is actually very challenging to go figure out how to account for revenue in different ways.
Do you have any thoughts on profit first?
What do you mean by profit first?
This is a new accounting thing about you set first your profit and then after that you use what's left for the months.
Yeah, I think people are going to come up with philosophies on how to solve some of these problems, right? Like, and that sounds good. Okay,
Yeah, fair
but are
enough.
you sure? Are you sure the profit you made is profit?
Yeah,
Right? My concerns go in those territories.
got it. So what time do you think those problems disappear, if they ever disappear? Or what time do you think there is, what time in the company's life it becomes easier, you think, for finance? Or if it
When
ever
you really go have dedicated people working on
dedicated? And in your experience, that happens around what size?
it. It happens somewhere between like 5 million and 10 million in revenue is what I've seen typically.
Got it. Out of the 100+ company that you're advising, do you see a trend going enterprise versus SMB?
Ah, I think a typical path is start actually with startups or SMBs. Usually startups though, because I think startups represent bigger companies more than SMBs do. SMBs
Mm.
are SMBs, right? And then basically move up market. So that is a typical pattern that a lot of companies have done. Another pattern I've seen is companies just know that this is an enterprise business and they focus on enterprise. So those are the two things I've seen.
How would you recommend, what would you recommend to a company that goes SMB at the moment and wants to go up market?
I'd figure out how to learn about what different customer segments need from your product. Like your product, and really it's about learning what problems these different customer segments have that your product can solve that it might not be solving today. So even for us, like in a way, we're starting with individuals, right? And we're focused on the individual inside of companies and personal use cases. And this is with my business FYI. And now we've been using that attention that we've gotten and the people that have been signing up from companies specifically and talking to them about the needs that they have, the problems that they have, collaborating with team members and going much deeper into that, showing them mock-ups, doing user testing with them, doing all kinds of things like that in order to understand what problems they have and how we can solve them on top of the product that we've already built. And so to me, a lot of it has to do with different types of demographics, different types of companies, different types of people have different problems. And your product, when you target a single kind of type of customer, it doesn't necessarily translate into another type of customer also being able to be completely happy with what you've created. Usually the foundation is there, but there might be more things they need. So for us, we're building things that we're learning about or oriented around how teams collaborate with documents, how teams are kind of troubled by finding them, how teams are troubled by organizing their documents. And that's a little bit of a different problem than an individual just looking for a document and trying to find it.
Do you think there is a lot of similarity between your FYI product and the Slack product in the sense, they are trying to get the individual and then growing into the organization and potentially providing enterprise security and stuff like that that only enterprise level needs?
I don't view Slack as a company or a product that you can use on your own as an individual. So in that part, we're more like Superhuman, where you can use us as an individual. And then we're also like Slack, where you can use us with a team. That's what we're building towards. So yeah, the similarity is with Slack, as companies get larger and they continue to use Slack, the use cases and needs change over time. So there is security, there's more administrative features, there's more need for going back in history. There's a bunch of those kind of features that Slack has. So yeah, I would say that it's definitely similarities to Slack, but also similarities to Superhuman. And, we think we can get kind of the best of both, where an individual can sign up and get a ton of value inside of a company. And then they're sort of incentivized as they use a product. And we have features where they want to bring their team in, and everyone's getting more value as the team, more people in the company use it, just like Slack.
Mm-hmm. And do you, in order to acquire new customers, do you go more heavily on inbound, or do you actually also consider outbound to some extent?
Both. I think you have to do both. I think businesses scale today by doing both.
Can you give us a little bit of example of outbound that you're doing?
Outbound would be reaching out to certain types of people kind of on the higher end of the market, basically. So folks who are certain types of customers that we might want to have in the future inside of companies. So we might reach out to a CIO, might reach out to CMO, might reach out to folks like that who we think run departments that we can sort of service.
And what channel do you use for that?
Usually it's email, and sometimes it's also LinkedIn.
Have you tried other channels yet?
Those are our two favorite: outbound emailing and LinkedIn. Sometimes we'll even use the phone.
Oh, okay. Why would you use the phone when you can't get them into the two other channels?
The phone works really well. It's not even about that. It's just it's an augmentation of the strategies. So yeah, the phone works really well.
So why don't you just do a phone then?
It doesn't always work really well. So I think it's not about, I don't know. I don't take this attitude of like, I have one channel, I'm gonna go make it work, and that's the only channel I have. I usually take the attitude of use the right channel for the person. My phone's ringing, and I still have a regular analog phone. It'll stop ringing.
So cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of.
So someone's trying to reach out to you.
There you go. Someone's trying to reach out to me by the phone. It's funny. We were just talking about that, right? It's too funny. So yeah, I think you want to reach your customer. That's what matters. Yeah, and sometimes, you need the phone. Sometimes you need to go walk into their office, right? You need to do these things, especially early on when you're really trying to learn and looking to figure out what matters to them. A lot of the time, that stuff is really important.
Yeah, I'm curious why you thought that. I mean, mostly at the beginning of a company, and obviously that's not your first company, but at the beginning of the company, usually people just focus on inbound or outbound. It's very rare to actually have that focus on both. Is there one that takes priority at the moment, or it's like 50-50 kind of effort?
What I've found is that it's if you're so there's I would say discovery or learning phase or
Hmm.
research phase depending on what you're doing. So in sales you call it discovery. In other areas like a product you call it research, and
That's true.
uh, and in marketing you call it research too. And then in other areas you might call it learning. So to me, sales discovery can happen for any type of customer while you're also doing kind of self-service, bottom-up signups that are happening in your business too. So again, like I think there's too many traditional thoughts around this that are potentially not the best because they can hurt your business. Because what you're saying is, I'm just going to focus on getting self-service signups, and yet there are companies that are larger that are probably signing up for your product already, and you don't know enough about them. So some of it has to do with who's signing up and who can you make happy today versus who do you need to discover more about. And so we like to do discovery of different customer types at the same time.
Okay. What's your strategy for prospecting in outbound? Why would you contact this company versus this one? Do you wait for someone at that company to test your
In
product
the
first, or how
Yeah,
does that
it's
work?
nice when someone already tries it. At the same
Yeah.
time, there might be companies that we think are a great fit that we just go outbound with right away.
What are some of the criteria that makes you think it's a good fit? How do you actually
It
discover
depends on the
that?
product. It depends on the product, right? So I
Hmm.
would say that it depends on our ability to pitch the product more than anything else. Like, can we pitch this product successfully to that customer? That's really what we're looking for. And that criteria is just based on the features we have, as well as if we're really trying to close that customer. Usually, what we're trying to do is we're not trying to close a customer, we're in discovery. We're looking to talk to them and learn kind of how they think about the problems that they have, and what kind of solutions they've already tried. Those are the two key areas. Like, how do they think about the problems related to our product, and then what solutions have they already tried?
Do you use your existing list of customers in order to figure out what the next company you should contact? Or is just
Yeah,
random, or is
yeah.
the people you what you want?
Existing list of
Yeah,
customers is really important for that. Of course, yeah.
cool. Makes sense. What about inbound? So what's your strategy there for inbound?
I think inbound, we do everything we can from using social channels to learning what keywords people are searching for related to our product or ancillary to it, and start doing content marketing. That's usually kind of the main inbound strategy anyway, but we use a combination of social and search on our end. That's what I tend to like to use.
Does that tie to content marketing to some extent, or is mostly SEO, or a bit of both?
Um, it's mostly content I don't see the difference between content marketing and SEO. I
Mm,
would say that because you
it's
need
linked.
content in order for search traffic to come. So it's mostly content marketing if you look at it like that.
Have you considered any viral marketing for your product?
What do you mean by viral? Like, how do you define it? Like, what's your?
Well, one person install it, and then that person makes other people install it.
So we're already getting a lot of word of mouth
Mm,
inside of companies where they're spreading it. So that's one aspect that we look to see before we do something where it's referral based or viral, like you're saying.
hmm.
A lot of the ideas that we have around FYI for teams and building out our team product and feature set has a lot to do with us helping people with the behavior they're already doing around documents, which is they're collaborating on them and they're sharing them. So they're already doing that with other people. We've been studying and learning how can we build features that kind of encourage those aspects.
So it seems like you got a lot of things already nailed down on that side of the business. Do you actually have any challenges right now in your business?
I think there's always challenges, and
Of
and
course.
usually the challenges I think are a combination of moving fast on your product and being able to build it fast enough, and also making sure that you're building the right thing for the market. And so I think we're always challenged with those two things, which is how do we build fast enough, and how do we also make sure that what we're building is the right thing for the market.
How do you make sure you move fast enough then?
A lot of work on engineering processes. That's engineering for the most part, and making sure that the team is estimating, the team feels confident in the milestones and ship dates that they're saying. So my approach to that has a lot to do with actually a lot of rigor on engineering and engineering spending effort on planning before they actually start writing a lot of code.
That's interesting that you don't see the marketing side as challenging. Um,
I don't, but my first company was a
yeah, yeah,
marketing company on the internet, and so I don't really find marketing very challenging.
yeah. It's
I
a
find
lucky
that to
place
be, well, I mean, it's just,
because I don't
l-
find
l-
engineering very challenging. So
yeah, yeah,
it's just,
like, yeah, you might not find engineering challenging, but if I told you that, you needed to build something, you probably couldn't tell me accurately how long it's going to take. So to me, that's a major engineering challenge.
that's right.
And I don't know anyone that really has solved it fully yet. And we're working on doing that at my business.
But the funny thing is that would you actually be able in marketing to tell me how long it was gonna take you to be number one on a Google search, for example?
Yeah, but that's because there's an outside factor, which is Google. In the case of engineering,
Mm,
there's no outside factors. You're in control. You're the engineer.
that's
It's
interesting.
just
Yeah.
it just boils down to the amount of planning you're doing, right?
Okay, fair
So
enough.
I
That's a
would.
fair point. I take
What was
it.
that?
That's a fair
Huh?
point. I take
Yeah.
it.
So I feel like, yeah, I can't tell you in marketing when we'll be number one in Google if that's our goal. I can tell you after running some experiments and even through prior experience or planning expectation of what's going to happen with certain types of content, right? And it won't always hit it, but I can tell you that a lot of that is also a lot more uncertain, right? Because it's content and it's creative endeavor. I don't consider the majority of engineering being creative. Sure, creative solutions are
Yeah, yeah.
required, but even those creative solutions are things that you can plan out and say how long it's going to take pretty precisely. So, yeah, I mean, engineering by nature of it is binary, you know? And so I think like it's a lot easier to get estimates and accuracy on engineering in terms of being able to say it's going to get done by X time and it gets done. At the same time, I think engineering has not been disciplined enough in general to do that. And when I say, marketing isn't challenging, I'd say that the one thing I would want to say about this is people tend to be really good at the muscle that they've developed for the longest amount of time. Just like, if you just keep working on your legs, at the gym, your legs will be really strong, but your arms might not be if you never work on your arms or rarely work on them. So for me, marketing is a muscle, product development is a muscle. I would say that sales, I know how to do. I actually give really good sales advice to people. I've watched people do it, but I haven't done as much sales as I'd like to do, right, myself. And so there's a lot more of that, and especially enterprise. Smaller sales is I've done. I think enterprise is something that I'm going to level up, work with people, hire people to help us with that over time. Um, and so that's not muscle. In engineering, I'm not an engineer. I fake it. I like to fake it because I think, I used to say I can out Google the engineers, and I pretty much can, right? When they have a problem, because I'm good with Google. And so to me, like the area, a lot of people try to build new muscle and they don't focus on the muscle they already
They're
have
really good
and
at, yeah.
making it better. And so I tend to like have learned a lot about not doing that, right? And making sure I'm making the muscle I already have much better.
No, it's a great advice to focus on your strength and not your weaknesses.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit how you actually instillate this rigor at the engineering level. What did you actually put in place that you find was working for you? And maybe some of the don'ts as well, something that you find was not working at all.
I think the number one thing on engineering for us was making sure that the engineers are planning upfront and writing tasks, uh, not in the this is going to take a half day, but more like this is going to take an hour. Ideally, this is going to take 15 minutes. And that enables them to do research and prototyping on technologies and things they might not be as familiar with. And most of the time when you build something, there's areas where you're not familiar. So
That's
it's
right.
really about determining what are we building? What do I need to build? What technologies, frameworks, libraries, Amazon Web Services am I going to use? Which of those are familiar to me? Which ones are right to use? Which ones do I need to prototype and understand if they're right? And then going down a whole process of basically research and planning and coming up with literally a task list. Here's the reason why this is really important. If you're working, whether you're working in an office as an engineer or you're working from home, you're going to have lunch for an hour. maybe longer. If you're working from home, you might need to go pick up your kids. If you're working from an office, you might have a doctor's appointment. All these things are breaks in your day. If you told me something's going to take a half day and it'll be done, by noon tomorrow, but you have a dentist appointment in the morning, you just lost like an hour or two of literally like 4 hours you had in the beginning of the day. So now something you thought would take half a day, which is about 4 hours, you haven't been able to get done that morning. And you couldn't, like, you just assumed that you were going to have the time. So now you're done at 2 at best. That's still later than whatever deadline you told me, right? So to me, it's really about having tasks that you can do that you know how long they're going to take, so that you can plan your day accordingly all around your life. So if you needed to, you realize that you can sit down for an hour and do a task because you've already planned it out. Because there's all that whole theory about, engineers take an hour or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to like get in the zone and all that. That's not true if you know what you need to do and you just sit down and you just do that one thing. A lot of reasons why things take time, even non-engineers, is because when we sit down, we don't know what we should be doing at that exact moment. We don't have a list. We don't know the specifics of it. We haven't done any planning around it. And so we sit down and we first have to figure that out. We have to do that every time we sit down to work. So what I'm saying is take the time to actually do all of your planning ahead of time, so you're not just sitting down at that moment and trying to figure out what to work on and why.
Very cool. Lots of good takeaways here. How big is the engineering team at the moment?
We're about, at Crazy Egg, there's about over a dozen engineers. At FYI, there's about 6 or 7.
And do you use any sort of methodology that, like, Scrum or anything
Not
else?
really. No, we make up our own.
Make up your own. Do you have any routine or any, maybe Mondays, effectively that planning you're talking about, or how does actually planning goes into that?
Yeah, we don't focus it as much on days or anything like that. We focus it a lot more on tasks and things that we're looking to accomplish. And the planning is almost continuous, and it happens as we're building the current thing, planning for the next things happening. And so there's a lot more of a continuous process, I would say. And we're not like taking like a day for planning and then execution and things like that. We're making sure we manage our time so that we're able to do planning as well as execution kind of continuously. Because what we found is that another important thing for engineers and engineering is for them to have different types of tasks that they can switch off from if needed. Like you might have written a bunch of code for like 6 hours straight, and you might need a break, but you're still working. So then you would do planning the rest of the day, for example.
Oh, that's
and
really
prototyping,
cool.
Things like that. Yeah, we noticed that about all other areas of the business too, except maybe design. I think designers are a little bit different, where like they don't mind just designing most of the time, but they're still reading, designing, some research, getting feedback. So there is still a switch up. So I think as humans, switching up our work enables us to go back and forth between things much more effectively.
So the engineers themselves actually do the planning. You don't have any person dedicated to actually do the planning. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so you take people accountable for their planning. How do you actually review that?
And someone else is checking.
That?
Someone else is also reviewing and checking your plan.
Oh, another engineer, or?
Yes.
Nice. So you got that peer review for the planning phase as well.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Cool. And do you have like any manager in place, or how's the managerial structure at your company? How does that work?
Yeah, there's a head of engineering who's the manager of all the engineers right now in both companies.
What's your involvement in all of that? What do you care about in terms of report back to you? Because you obviously can't oversee everything.
It's really about when are things going to get done and what are the trade-offs that need to be made, and how can I, more as a product person, help make the trade-offs.
How does that come to you? Every week, every day, or ad hoc?
It's usually ad hoc and multiple times a week, sometimes daily. It just depends on what's going on.
And you're responsible for finding out what we should build, or how does that work?
Yeah, myself and the product team. So designers and in the case of FYI, my co-founder and I are responsible for kind of what should be built. Yep.
Okay. And you guys are working remotely?
Yeah, fully remote, both companies. Yep.
Can you tell a little bit about, obviously we all know there's tons of challenges, especially in communication. Can you let us know what are the things that you put in place that you thought was working for you?
In terms of remote work,
Yeah, for communication mostly.
we do a lot of documentation. So majority of our communication happens in documentation, and we don't rely as much on Slack for decision making. So
Oh, that's
some companies
interesting.
will rely on Slack for decision making. We make decisions more in documents, and we make sure that decisions are documented.
Can you give us an example of how that would go?
Um, yeah, so like a lot of things start with documents versus starting with a conversation. And even if they start with a conversation, we get into a document pretty fast if it's something serious. So the decision making and the accountability isn't about someone trying to find a message in Slack. It's actually about someone looking to find find a document, ironically, in using FYI,
Yeah, that's right.
because we know that decisions get made in documents. Decisions don't really get made in conversations, meetings, or Slack. And if they are made in any of those places, there's a document associated with it, like a leadership meeting document that has all the sort of decisions and next steps that we're making oriented around the work we're doing. All of our meetings have a document associated with it for agenda as well as discussion topics, and we're writing in the document while we're on the call as well.
So you got the agenda, the purpose. And what do you do with those documents when they're filed? Do you ever revisit them or not? Because that's one thing that I found is whenever things are documented, it's very rare that we actually come back and actually do something about those documents.
Yeah, because we have a culture where we're reviewing these documents and iterating them and getting feedback. We're actually coming back to them quite a bit.
So you have a living document actually that you
Yeah,
keep on revisiting. That's pretty cool.
yeah,
How about how much documents do you have total around?
that's a good question. Let me tell you how many I have in my
Just two.
account right now. I have 26,000 in my account
Holy
right
hell.
now.
Yeah.
That's through many different uh, a few different email addresses. Uh, I think I'm gonna go to one of my other email addresses if I can. Yeah, I should be able to tell you in a second. Um, yeah, so I have 26,000 on my end. If I look at my co-founder Marie, she has created. Let's see. Let me see if I can find a good calculation of that. Yeah, we're looking at about she's created 157, 422. So 405, probably over 600 documents. She really likes creating documents.
How long does that take to create all those documents in terms like, is it the last year? Is it the last month? Is it the last?
I'd say it's been the last 18 months ish, maybe a little bit longer.
Okay. So there's a good routine of creating
Yeah.
documents at your company. Do you
Yep.
ever sort of like close them and say, okay, well, not useful anymore, and then we move on to something else? Or do you have some?
Yeah, yeah. Some do sit there and they're old and they're there, but what we find is that like we create a lot of documents for many different reasons,
Mhm.
and we end up yeah. So this was actually 2 years. So that 600 number is about 2 years
Got it.
of documents to be accurate. I looked in FYI to find that info. So and it was across a bunch of the different tools we use. Slack. We create posts in Slack as well sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Google Drive and Docs and Dropbox as well.
At some point there was the wiki was pretty popular. Do you have any form of that, or you keep on using like Google Docs instead?
Yeah, we use Google Docs and then we use FYI to find our documents. So we don't really rely on a wiki at the moment.
Yeah. So you're eating your own dog food at this
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, yeah. Of course, you have to. Yeah.
How do you make sure? Let me jump back to working remotely. One of the other challenges is make sure everyone is on the same page. Is that, well, that's funny enough because you're talking about documents. Do you actually have, in-person meetings, or how do you actually go about setting the direction of the company or setting where you're going next? Is every announcement starting with a document as well? Is it part of the
Yeah.
process?
So we have a lot of decks that we use when we present to the team, and decks meaning not a lot, but like we use decks to kind of communicate with the team and communicate strategy. we do create documents that are strategy. We don't ever meet in person in order to do a lot of this stuff. Sometimes my co-founder and I do because it's just convenient because we live in the same area. But typically the majority of our work is all happening remotely and including strategy and things like that. We don't really do offsites or retreats at the moment.
Oh yeah, why is that? It's very
Um,
popular at the moment.
I think that doing those things is not necessarily bad, but it's also a little bit of a crutch. And so, yeah, I think crutches are not good for companies. And crutch means we're waiting for uh, we're waiting for these meetings in order to accomplish certain things or to feel a certain way. And I think we would be very prescriptive and careful if and when we started doing some of these retreats to make sure that they're done effectively and for the right reasons. And so we wouldn't want people to, like, what happens is people then look forward to these retreats in order to accomplish certain things. Yeah.
I see. So you see the retreats as more disruptive into your routine or your normal operation.
Yep.
Okay. Fair enough. Do you have, we're coming to an end here. Do you actually have a book recommendation that, okay, obviously besides, the Startup Chat podcast, so book recommendation, podcast recommendation, and everything else?
Yeah. I don't think I have a podcast recommendation right now.
Oh, you got your own one, of course.
I have my own. I think there's episodes I like. So the only one I would say that's actually, I do have a podcast recommendation. I've been on it twice. It's a little bit of a newer podcast. It's called Below the Line by James Bashira. I
What's good
really
about
like
it?
I really like the podcast. What's good about it is the conversations I've had with him are like 2 hours long. He's had a 3-hour conversation with Sahil, the founder of Gumroad. And so, yeah, I find that his podcast really goes deep into, like, we talked for 2 hours about remote work once. The other time we talked a lot about different varying topics that I really believe in. And that was another 2-hour conversation with him. So yeah, I really find the podcast very enlightening because it goes deeper into topics that most podcasts don't talk about. That's why it's called Below the Line. These are kind of below the line topics. And he's a very good interviewer as well. I mean, I've been on twice. And then my book recommendation is it's a book called The Courage to be Disliked. And it's about Alderian, I think. Yeah. Philosophy, which is Alfred Adler, I believe. And it's a conversation between a younger person and a person who has studied the philosophy, and they're basically talking about it and going back and forth. And the younger person is asking a bunch of questions. There's just a lot of concepts, even if, like, you don't have this problem of, being caring about being disliked or anything. There's a lot of concepts in the book that can be really valuable to you just to explore and think through.
Yeah, I love the idea. Okay, so if people want to know more about, FYI or yourself, what should they do?
Yeah, go to usefyi.com and sign up. I'm on Twitter at HNSHAH. That's my username. And I also have a newsletter that my co-founder Marie and I run called Product Habits. And it's at producthabits.com. So those are kind of the 3 ways to engage.
Lovely. Awesome. Hiten, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.